full impact of today's tragedy still has not been felt because the magnitude of the crime is practically impossible to comprehend. Charles J. Whitman, a 25-year-old Marine veteran who earned a sharpshooter rating while on active duty. He was identified by police as the sniper. He was shot down on the observation deck by 2 city policemen.
The independent actions of those 2 city policemen brought them together into a deadly drama. What happened up on the tower shaped the rest of their lives and sent them on diverging paths.
That's a former Ranger Foundation.
Ramiro Martinez's career in law enforcement was just beginning when he climbed the tower to get to a sniper. 4 decades later, in the study of his New Braunfels home, he still remembers the days right after the shooting.
I tried to wash it out of my mind.
About 160 miles northwest, in a tiny apartment in the small West Texas town of Menard, Houston McCoy also remembers that day up on the tower. His law enforcement career lasted just a couple of more years after the shooting.
I enjoyed the job immensely.
McCoy and Martinez, 2 men connected by that early August day. As the 2 men heard of the sniper, they made their way separately to the tower. Martinez was the first to head up one of the elevators.
See the little lights flicker as the floors go by. I said an act of contrition, because as a Catholic I was taught that in case imminent death, you say an act of contrition.
When the door opened, he found, among others, a man with a rifle, a plainclothes officer, he thought. They climbed the stairs from the 27th floor leading up to the observation deck's reception area. On the way up, they found 2 people dead and 2 critically injured. Even more determined by what they saw, they continued up. Then the man accompanying Martinez asked a question.
He says, "Are we playing for keeps?" And I looked at him and I said, "Saw dead people there, and I had seen all the dead people outside." And I said, "You're damn right we are." He says, "Well, I guess you better deputize me." And that's when I found out that he was a civilian. And I said, "Consider yourself deputized right there."
That man was civilian Alan Crum, an assistant manager at the UT Co-op. By then, Officer McCoy had also taken an elevator up to the 27th floor. He didn't know that Martinez and Crum were in the lobby above until another officer with him mentioned it right before reaching the top of the stairs.
If he'd have showed up at the top of that stairway with that rifle in his hand, he'd be gone. There's no doubt in my mind, he'd be gone.
They all saw another victim, the receptionist, dying in a pool of blood. Martinez decided to make a move. He started kicking the glass panel door leading to the observation deck. It was blocked on the outside by a dolly the sniper used to carry his footlocker full of weapons to the top.
We hadn't said a word to each other or anything, and probably wasn't up there very much so less than a minute, before Martinez started kicking that door.
And then it went over clanging. And I braced myself because I figured that the sniper could hear this.
Then Martinez, armed with a pistol and legs crouched, led the way around the southeast corner. He soon sensed someone behind him. It was McCoy.
And he had a shotgun. And that was a beautiful sight, to see that shotgun.
At this point, Martinez and McCoy rounded the next corner, but couldn't see all the way because the clock tower protruded out and blocked their line of sight. Inching closer, they finally spotted a man wearing a white bandana, his rifle in hand aimed toward the southwest corner.
So that's when I fired the first round. I hit him in the left side somewhere, and he came up with a rifle.
McCoy moved to Martinez's right and fired twice at Whitman.
Hollered at McCoy to shoot, and he did hit him with a shotgun.
All of a sudden, he just slowly slid down into a laying position.
At the time, McCoy felt there might be at least 2 other snipers, and he only had 2 shots left. Martinez then grabbed the shotgun, ran to Whitman, and fired one more blast.
I just said it real fast, tell them to call the radio stations and announce it's all over.
Who actually fired the fatal blow that ended Whitman's life doesn't seem to matter to either man decades later. But in the immediate aftermath, Officer Martinez received more attention. In his book, A Sniper in the Tower, author Gary Laverne believes the focus on Martinez was almost immediate, due in part to a news release put out by the police chief the day of the shooting. It mentioned Martinez, not McCoy. But Laverne believes neither man could have killed Whitman without the other.
Ultimately, Ramiro Martinez and Houston McCoy ambushed him while he was sitting in that corner.
Martinez went on to become a Texas Ranger and later a Comal County Justice of the Peace before retiring.
When anniversaries come around or somebody asks me, I don't mind talking to them because I feel that that's good therapy. Get it out. It's not that I'm bragging about what happened. It's good therapy. Get it out of your system.
McCoy eventually left law enforcement and became a flight instructor. Now the divorced father lives on his own in the small town where he grew up.
I still have dreams.
A few years ago, there were reports that McCoy was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder.
And I can still wake up at night and See, hell, that's the way it happened, you know.
Houston McCoy and Ramiro Martinez, two men forever connected by the events of August 1st, 1966, despite the different paths their lives took from that heroic moment where together they ended the madness.
A press conference was held soon after the shooting. Then Police Chief Bob Miles used a chalkboard to diagram what went on the tower's observation deck. Here's film captured from that 1966 press conference.
Martinez came out and went around the east side crawling. Crum came out and went west this way. And as the subject was sitting here leaning up back this way with his gun pointing this direction. As Martinez rounded this corner here, he saw him with his gun in this direction. He knew Mr. Crum was coming this way, and he had to come around the corner at the same time. Yeah. Martinez fired from here, from this point here.
Officer Houston McCoy followed Martinez and shot Whitman twice with a shotgun.
And the full impact of today's tragedy still has not been felt because the magnitude of the crime is practically impossible to comprehend.
Former newsman Neil Speltz brought the news of what Whitman did that August day to an Austin audience.
I just happened to be the guy who was standing down here with a microphone talking about what I saw.
He takes us back to what he saw that day on the UT campus.
You could see the bullets hitting off the side of the tower.
Most of the moving pictures we have of that day were shot by this man. He tells us how he got the shots when we continue to explore the tower shooting 40 years later.
One of history's worst mass murders occurred here in Austin today. By official count tonight, 49 persons were hit by gunfire. There are 16 dead and 33 injured. It started last night when a man reportedly killed his wife and his mother. That same man apparently rounded up an arsenal and supplies this morning and then went to the observation deck of the University of Texas Tower.
Former KTBC newsman Neil Speltz gave Austinites a moment-by-moment account of Charles Whitman's actions that early August day of 1966. It's one of the most important stories of his career and a very personal one for the longtime Austinite. Speltz says the events of that day are burned in his mind's eye.
Speltz joined me here on the UT campus to talk about some of the bits and pieces that he will never forget.
It started between classes. 11:50 in the morning, classes, the bell rang and they had 10 minutes, and so they were walking around. But when you look around this mall as an example, there was a dead body here and another one there. Someone who was wounded lying beside a dead body, feigning death. And when a man rushed out, a Vietnam veteran rushed out to help pick up the dead body and bring him to safety, not knowing it was dead, then the other person jumped up and ran alongside to get out of the way. This flagpole over here, the one lady sat down at the base of that flagpole and had only the flagpole between her and the tower for the entire hour and a half or time that it was up there, just in the blistering sun, and hearing screaming and hearing ambulances, hearing gunshots, and the gunshots were from all around. The police were returning fire from the ground. Private citizens came in with high-powered deer rifles, and you say, hey, what was that all about? But let me tell you, those people, I think, saved a lot of lives, because the Austin Police Department at that time, no police department in the country, had, as unbelievable as it may sound, high-powered weapons with scope sights. Patrolman Billy Speed was standing here just below the tower and thought he had pretty good cover. You've got the barrier here, the concrete, just a very narrow space here that he could look through and see the tower at that point. But this was where he was shot and killed. Whitman was such a fantastic shot from that great distance. He was able to shoot right between these two small spaces and hit the policeman here. And he fell, and one of our reporters and other folks moved him off back out of the way to administer aid, and then he was carried off to an ambulance. He ultimately died.
But this made it clear to everyone that this guy knew how to handle
listen, there was no question, because he was hitting moving targets, he was hitting people. He hit a boy riding a bicycle, and it was just no question. He was a marksman and knew what he was doing. It's kind of interesting, Paul, when you look at it, this space here, I guess, would have to be described as the one area that was the most open on campus then and now. The tower just sits up there, you can see anything and everything. And you think, that's quite a distance away, no question. But still, it was not that far. But in order to rescue people, besides one of our photographers, besides a Vietnam veteran and others rushing, other students coming in to try to help people, they wheeled in an armored car and used the armored car as a shield in order to move out to pick up people that were lying here on the mall and put them into the armored car, not knowing if they were dead or alive, but that way, of course, they felt protected to be able to get the rescue underway.
Why are you willing to talk about it over the years like this? It's important to you,
Well,
isn't it, to discuss it?
frankly, it's important only because it's an important event. It's not so much important to me. I just happen to be the guy who was standing down here with a microphone talking about what I saw. Officer Martinez was a genuine, courageous hero. And it's an important event in that we just must learn from the mistakes of the past, and this was a big mistake. As you look around here, I mean, a university campus anywhere in the United States is a place where you can expect serenity, tranquility. It's a public place. It's a place where people are open, and yet all of a sudden, by the acts of that one madman, that space was violated. And it was violated for all of us. We now don't walk around in open public spaces like we did 40 years ago prior to the event. It's kind of, you look around, you're more aware, you're more cautious than you were back then.
Speltz says he believes as time passes, the memory of what happened here 40 years ago will begin to fade, but he worries the story could become exaggerated as it's retold and retold. While reporters and anchors like Speltz tell stories to viewers with words, it would be hard to really tell them without pictures. The black and white footage taken that day in 1966 was filmed by a KTBC cameraman.
Gordon Wilkeson is retired from the news business now, but back in 1966, he was a news photographer for the only television station in town, KTBC. It hadn't been that long since Gordon had left the Army. He says that's why the gunfire on the University of Texas campus that August day didn't bother him as long as he had cover.
I wasn't being anybody's hero, but I had a good 75 millimeter lens on my Bolex, and that's what got the shot.
The shots of gunfire from the tower, the shots of a wounded, pregnant Claire Wilson on the hot pavement. He was there as students risked their lives to rescue fellow students.
Brian, how many have you gone out to rescue?
Today, too.
What did you have to do?
Run hard and keep low. There's a lot of heroics that were going on then. Same thing was going on over on the drag when they brought the armored car out to pick up one of the wounded persons. He was just firing left and right then, and it was a good idea, and I thought they'd never get the guy in the truck.
The news was shot on film back then with cameras that were very heavy. Wilkeson didn't have a tripod, so he had to hold the camera steady as bullets fired around him.
There were some that hit pretty close, I'd say within 20 feet, something like that. You could see the bullets hitting off the side of the tower once the law enforcement bunch got involved.
But even as bullets bombarded the campus, Wilkeson was still a newsman, still a photographer who wanted the money shot.
I hoped at one point I could, get a recognizable shot of his face or something, but that was needed a lens about 3 times longer than what I had.
As Wilkeson tried to get the shots, one thought kept running through his mind.
When's he going to run out of ammunition? I mean, at that time I didn't know it had 2 big boxes or 3 boxes or whatever it was and everything in the way of ammunition. I thought surely at the rate he's firing, he's going to run out of something.
Wilkeson was the first photographer to arrive on the campus that day. Once the nation learned of what happened on the tower, the national networks came calling for his shots.
It was quite a day.
A day captured by the eyes of news photographer Gordon Wilkeson.
Less than 10 years after the tower shooting, a made-for-television movie was made about it. It was called Deadly Tower and was filmed in Baton Rouge, Louisiana at their state capitol building, which looks much like the UT Tower. University officials didn't want it to be filmed here because they said that it was not in the best interest of those affected by what Whitman did.
The Austin police called this woman one of the luckiest people alive. She was the last person to speak to Whitman before he opened fire from the tower.
And when he heard us, he stood up and turned and faced us, and he had a rifle in each hand.
Whitman's last words and the reason this woman thinks he let her live when News 8 Austin continues to explore the Tower shooting 40 years later.
One of those who is out of breath now after running out onto the mall rescuing those who have been shot is Brian Ellison of Austin, who has been in Vietnam and has been back for 2 years. Brian, how many have you gone out to rescue?
Today, too.
What did you have to do?
Run hard and keep low.
Did you have any trouble getting them up, or did any shots come close to you while you were out there?
No shots came close to me. Just the last one. He was dead. He was dead weight. He was a little hard to pick up, too limp. Not like someone who's knocked out.
How many have you seen that are dead today?
Just one. I hope not anymore.
A young woman who had just graduated from high school and her male friend could have easily been on the list of dead that day. Instead, Charles Whitman allowed them to live. Cheryl Botts was the last person to speak to Whitman before he opened fire on the campus. The decisions that she made saved her life and changed it forever.
The church especially was so receptive, and they just all hugging and loving on me and had me get up and share a little bit.
Cheryl Botts Dickerson looks at the news clippings from 40 years ago, and she still finds it hard to believe she's even here to talk about them.
I always tried to say, I don't know why I didn't die that day.
That day was August 1st, 1966, the day fate would bring her face to face with the man who turned UT's tower into a sniper's den.
And this man said, "Someone is shooting at people from the tower." And we just looked at each other, and both of us immediately, oh my gosh, it has to be the man we just saw.
The man was Charles Whitman. Cheryl would be the last person to speak to him. The encounter would change her life. You see, if anyone symbolized the innocence that existed that lazy summer, the innocence Charles Whitman tried to shatter, it was Cheryl Botts.
I was from a very small town, and I was a very shy, quiet, reserved person.
Then 19-year-old Cheryl Botts was a small-town girl with a wide world ahead of her. She just graduated from Rockdale High and was set to attend Howard Payne College, a college with the same small-town feel of her own hometown. But before she headed off to college, Cheryl would make a trip to what to her was the big city, Austin, to visit her grandmother. Fate would twist and turn during the first 24 hours of her visit. It started with the 45-minute late arrival of her uncle to pick her up at the bus station. While she waited, she struck up a conversation with a young man named Don Walden.
And we just talking, and he asked me if I'd ever seen the UT campus, and I said no, and he was a student there. And he said, well, let me come by tomorrow and get you. It's my day off. I'll just give you a tour of the campus.
The date was made, a first date with a first stop at the top of the UT Tower. There, Cheryl and Don signed the register provided by receptionist Edna Townsley.
Just a quick chit-chat, She seemed very nice and very pleasant. And we just, signed in and went straight on outside.
Little did they know Edna was about to meet up with fate, too. The view from above that morning was beautiful.
It was just gorgeous because you can see not just the city, but you can see the hills in the background. You can just see forever, it seems like.
By now it was after 11:30 and it was getting hot. Soon the other visitors also taking in the view were gone, and Cheryl and Don had the deck to themselves. But Cheryl remembers a series of maps out on the deck that described the landscape. They decided to examine them, quality time as they got to know each other better. They had no idea it would turn out to be another fateful decision that provided a chance to leave the tower alive.
And in retrospect, that's the kind of thing that'll send chill bumps up your spine, because had we not stopped and spent another 5 to 10 minutes, we might have walked in on him beating up the receptionist or something.
She's talking about Edna Townsley, the receptionist they'd met earlier as they'd signed the register. As Don and Cheryl looked at the map out on the deck, they had no idea Whitman was inside savagely beating the woman who'd welcomed them. Whitman would pull her bloody body behind a couch in the reception area. High noon was approaching now, and the tower's clock would soon chime 12 times. Don and Cheryl had another decision to make.
It seems like when I looked up at the clock, it seemed like it said it was 12 minutes till 12 or 7 minutes till 12, something like that. And he said, you want to stay and listen? Oh, no, let's don't. And that's probably another decision that would have been a totally different result.
Cheryl and Don decided to re-enter the glass-paneled door and go back inside. Only this time, the receptionist wasn't at her desk, but someone else was in the reception area.
It's like he had been bent over the couch.
Bent over the couch where Edna Townsley lay dying. They were face to face with a killer. They had no reason to suspect the violence just committed by the man in front of them, his brutality so close and so fresh. When we return, the confrontation with Charles Whitman.
And when he heard us, he stood up and turned and faced us, and he had a rifle in each hand.
And the reason Cheryl thinks he let them live.
Cheryl Botts and her date Don could easily have met the same fate as those people that police had just encountered at the top of the tower, but instead he let them live.
Cheryl Botts was on a first date with a young man she'd met the day before named Don Walden. Their view from atop the UT Tower was spectacular.
I just remember it being green, grass everywhere.
And it was hot that first day of August 1966, not a cloud in the sky. But the morning calm would soon turn chaotic as they took in the sights out on the observation deck. Inside, Charles Whitman attacked tower receptionist Edna Townsley. He beat her in the back of the head and dragged the dying woman behind a couch, leaving a trail of blood along the floor. Whitman was probably unaware there were two people still out on the deck, and they just decided to head back inside instead of waiting for the clock to strike 12. It was a decision that meant they were moments away from a face-to-face confrontation with a killer.
Well, when we walked in the door, the first thing I noticed is I looked to the right, and the receptionist was not at her desk. But I rationalized, and all this is taking place in 15 seconds, but I just rationalized in my mind, she's probably gone to lunch. And I didn't think anything about it.
The small-town girl from Rockdale also thought nothing of a reddish-brown swath on the floor directly in front of them. It was Edna Townsley's blood.
I called Don's attention to it because we needed to step over it. Again, I rationalized in my mind, is somebody going to varnish the floor, you know? I'm not the type of person to immediately assume something negative or something drastic, being small town, somewhat naive. And so we stepped over it, and just as we were stepping over it, I noticed a movement to our right, and we turned that way, and a man stood up.
Whitman was now aware he had company.
It was like he had been bent over the couch. And when he heard us, he stood up and turned and faced us, and he had a rifle in each hand. Now, I know people think, you didn't think anything about that? You know, well, we're walking through, we're talking, we didn't even stop walking. We did not even stop walking, which probably saved our lives.
A single word seemed to disarm Whitman, if only for a moment.
I just saw him, I smiled and said hi, and he smiled and said hello to me as well. And we just kept on going.
Cheryl and Don didn't know it at that moment, but an elevator ride down the tower would be the only way to finally escape the man bent on a shooting spree. The problem was those elevators were a floor below, and the stairs leading to them were blocked by an overturned chair.
Immediately, I'm thinking they're going to warn people there's varnish on the floor. You know, it seemed like I found an excuse or a reason for everything except the guns, but the guns didn't stay in my mind enough to, I don't know why I didn't wonder about them. Later, Don commented that he started to ask him if he was going to go out on the deck and shoot pigeons. And that's probably another thing that saved our life, that he did not stop and question him. You know, we didn't stop talking, we didn't stop walking, we just kept going.
As their elevator whisked them safely below, the tower's only other elevator brought two families, the Gabors and Lamports, up to the 27th floor above. They were looking forward to the view in time for the giant clock to chime. But Charles Whitman had his own plans. Now armed with a shotgun, he opened fire on them on those stairs. 2 dead, 2 critically wounded. The shooting had begun.
I just feel like there's an appointed time to die, and apparently that was not my time. I think the reason he didn't shoot us is because we did not stop and question him. We were not a barrier to anything he wanted to do. We were in and out of there so fast that when we left, it might have been like, well, okay, what was that? He didn't know, I don't think he even knew we were out there. I think we caught him off guard. See, this was the Austin paper for August the 2nd. That was the very next day.
When it was all over and the news media learned of Cheryl and Don's encounter with Whitman, their picture and story were in papers all across the country, even around the world.
Even Walter Cronkite had our picture on the evening news and told about, now the question has been answered, who was the last person to see Charles Whitman and live to tell about it.
Cheryl says the experience brought her out of a shell and ultimately into the classroom as a teacher. Now semi-retired in Luling, she's thankful to have touched the lives of some 4,000 students during her career. She feels blessed to have had the chance.
There's no reason why he shouldn't have shot us.
And no true explanation for what would follow that face-to-face confrontation with a killer.
Cheryl says she's talked very little about what happened on top of the tower with her children. Her youngest son is about to go off to a small college himself this fall. When Charles Whitman aimed at innocent people through the scope of his rifle, the senseless act was not only an assault on the university and on Austin, it was also an assault on our society. From a psychological standpoint, he took away the sense of safety that we felt in public places.
Besides the carbine, there was a 6mm Remington Magnum equipped with a 4-power scope sight, a 35.
News reports following Charles Whitman's attack revealed an arsenal that, in Austin that first day of August 1966, was second to none.
Charles Whitman was better armed at the time than the Austin Police Department.
When Charles Whitman was gunned down here in the northwest corner of the observation deck, it ended a siege that lasted 96 minutes. But soon the questions would begin.
In the days immediately after the shooting, the Austin Police Department received some criticism. How could a man be allowed to shoot at will for more than an hour and a half with no plan in place to stop such a situation? Why did Whitman have high-powered rifles but police did not? What about the lack of communication among officers that day? Fair questions, but perhaps unfair criticism at the time.
We learned a very valuable and expensive lesson in Austin.
The author of the only book ever written on the tower shooting says this crime probably changed law enforcement practices more than any other single crime committed by an individual in American history.
The shoes that the officers had on were not adequate. The clothes they had on were not adequate. The communications gear was not adequate.
You got to realize this was 1966. You did not have those handheld radios that you see people on television nowadays, you know, that they speak to directly to the station. Once you got out of your patrol car, you were on your own.
And once out of the police unit, an officer's weapon back then was meant for short-range situations. It took civilians to initially slow Whitman down after the first 20 minutes of his attack.
And I was running towards the South Mall, and while running, once in a while somebody would shoot, and I'd look to see if I recognized it as an officer, and actually it was a civilian, had a deer rifle or some type of a weapon shooting up at the tower.
And so after this, every major police department in the United States that was big enough to have one rearmed and formed SWAT teams.
In the days and years to follow, the emotional impact the tower shooting had to our society cannot be understated.
There is a sniper on the university tower firing at will.
Former KTBC newsman Neil Speltz remembers the comments from those who lived in other parts of the country.
You're from that town where that sniper shot everybody. It stayed around a long time.
Nothing like this had happened in a public setting like this anywhere before. It just didn't seem possible. Whitman proved it was.
He was the first to target strangers and kill them. And with that, we lost some sense of security in public places.
Walk past the flagpole and I can remember seeing the lady crouched down behind the flagpole. I can look at that balustrade over there and I know that Billy Speed was shot to death right there. And I can see the bodies lying out there on the South Mall.
An event like that has this profound effect on people. And some people, it's really devastating in terms of difficulty sleeping and so forth. But one thing that we find is that traumas often bring people together. It creates a sense of community.
Right after the shooting, Austin was in many ways a big, small town that embodied that sense of community. As the years and decades passed, Austin became much bigger, and so it seems did our nation's traumas. But through them all always emerges individuals who do great things, like the student body president who helped drag some of the wounded to safety as Whitman fired for what seemed like an eternity. We've since seen such scenes of heroism repeated.
And we saw it in New York City, obviously. We saw it in D.C. We saw it on the airplanes on Flight 93. The ordinary citizen, I believe, in this country does care very much about their brothers and their sisters. We really are each other's keeper. and we have that kind of responsibility.
As the campus came under fire that day in '66, so many individuals came through for others, desperately trying to match Whitman's arsenal with their compassion.
Saying, let's help that boy. Does he need help?
The tower shooting 40 years ago affected the University of Texas in so many ways. The individuals impacted from that day tried to cope as best they could, but the university community itself had to move on, even with the tower looming as a constant reminder of what happened that terrible August day in 1966.
Architect Paul Cray designed the UT Tower in 1933 with the full intention of making it the icon of the institution. When it was finished in 1937, it dominated the campus and Austin's skyline. At more than 300 feet tall atop a hill in the heart of campus, it became its heart and soul. It was exactly what Cray said it would be, the image carried in our memory when we think of the place.
It sort of provides that tether between generations of university students and alumni. It's that backdrop all the time of commencement or freshman convocations or football rallies or demonstrations or concerts or whatever it may be. The tower is always there.
And in 1966, the tower was in the midst of an important part of the university's history. Like around the rest of the country, race was an issue. The Civil Rights Act was only 2 years old, and the first black UT undergraduates were admitted only 10 years earlier. The Vietnam War was at its height, and LBJ was president. It was also the Darrell Royal era and a great time to be a Longhorn. The tower is now and was then a place where people would go to pose and show pride, just like they did during the most recent national championship earlier this year. But on that hot summer day in 1966, Charles Whitman used the very heart of the university and tried to break it. It took him 96 minutes to suddenly make the symbol of triumph one of tragedy. As soon as it's over, 13 people shot dead and more than 30 wounded.
And I think over the next several years, any time a person just saw the tower, it made them uncomfortable. It made them, it aroused those feelings.
Immediately after what was then called the crime of the century, the university closed the tower's observation deck to the public to repair bullet holes. The tower eventually reopened to the public and remained open until 1974. A series of suicides prompted the university to close it indefinitely. But many people over the years got the sense the sniper attack was what kept the top of the tower off limits, including the officer who led the charge to get Whitman.
Sometimes I feel that Charles Joseph Whitman still holds the tower or the University of Texas hostage because of what he did.
33 years after the shooting, the university decided to reopen the observation deck on a limited basis. There are now security guidelines, including a metal detector. Visitors pay $5 and look through metal bars that surround the deck.
So I think that granting access allows the university to take even greater ownership of its tower, along with the state.
On the same day the top of the tower reopened, the university renamed this existing pond the Tower Garden, dedicating it to the victims. Before the dedication, there was nothing on campus that officially acknowledged the tower shooting.
I think generally after something horrible, it's not uncommon for the community to just agree, we won't talk about it. Let's just move on. And it's not until the next generation, usually 25 or more years later, that people say, you know, we have enough distance. Let's now commemorate it. Let's acknowledge that this affected our history.
Plans to make the Tower Garden into more of a memorial by the 40th anniversary have stalled. This artist's rendering is all that's done at this point. But above it, the tower itself stands tall and has for 70 years. It symbolizes everything that has happened over that time, not simply 96 minutes from one horrible day.
It is a community, whether we're members of the faculty or members of the student body or parts of the administration. And even though it's a large university, it is still a finite community.
And at the center of it all, the tower is always there.
It has moods to it. It shares the joys and sorrows with the campus.
Joys, sorrows, this campus has seen its share. Towering above it all is the image carried in our minds when we think of the place. It is the heart of an institution that never stops beating.
17 people died as a result of Charles Whitman's actions. Dozens more were injured. These days, at the top of the tower, guided tours offer no mention of his name unless visitors specifically ask about it. That's our report. I'm Paul Brown for News 8 Austin.